So now that we've looked at the economic developments and social developments under Nicholas II, what I want to do in this video is look at the social divisions that Nicholas experienced during his reign. Okay, so we're going to start first by looking at the rural conditions of Russia. Okay, so a number of famines. We're talking a famine in 1891 to 1892 and 1898 to 1901 made living in the countryside a nightmare. Okay, grain output was less than 1/3 of that of Britain and Germany. So despite increases in grain, despite increase in grain, we see that they're still behind Britain and Germany in terms of the amount that is exported. Okay, there was also a population rise in these rural areas, making the situation, it's just exacerbating the entire problem, since the number of famine will be made worse by more people whose mouths are needed to be fed. Okay, so the living standards did, however, vary from region to region. There were prosperous commercial farming in the Ukraine and Baltic regions compared to central Russia. The poorest regions summoned the most support for the revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks. What's important to note here is that because Russia is so large and so vast and covers so many different ecosystems, that living conditions for peasants in one area of Russia might be a lot more pleasurable than living in another area of Russia. Okay, don't forget, in the sort of southern area of Russia, you have the flat steppe lands where farming is made very easy, compared to living in Siberia where farming is next to impossible. Okay, so the poorest regions did see extremist support. So we see extremism in poorer areas. So extremism in poor areas. Okay. So with that being said, we're going to have a look a little bit, go higher up the social structure and have a look at the nobility and the middle class. So around 1/3 of nobles' land was transferred to peasants and town dwellers between the years 1861 and 1914. This was to redistribute land. Okay, this was a redistribution of land. Redistribution of land. Simple as that. Okay. And this might have led to a decrease in wealth for the nobility. On paper, it would have done. In reality, it didn't. Okay, so this is only on paper. So on paper. In theory, it would have led to a decrease in wealth, but it actually didn't. And in fact, the middle class actually grew in size despite the loss of land. Okay. And many of the middle class served on the Zemstvo, which was as we remember, the local government. So we have the local government in Russia. So the nobility and the middle class actually didn't really see that much social division, there wasn't too much extremist support. Okay, dividing society even more, let's have a look at what happened with the church and what the church's role was with. I can't actually do a straight line. What the church's role was within society. Okay, so the Orthodox Church has close ties with the Tsar. Okay, the Tsar was patriarch of the church. Okay. Priests had close ties to the village and were expected to read out Tsarist decrees to inform the police. So this is when news travelled slowly. This was when news travelled slowly. Okay. the church exercised an era of censorship and control. Okay, so the church did control much of society. And under Alexander III, the church had more power to control primary education. Don't forget, under Alexander II, Alexander II put the power of primary education in the hands of the Zemstva. Primary education to the Zemstva, okay? And then he reformed this, he counter-reformed back because of the opposition from the church and from society. So the church did have control over primary education. And it became illegal during Nicholas's reign to convert from Eastern Orthodox to another faith, okay? So you couldn't convert to another faith in Russia. So in terms of how society developed, the Orthodox Church had less control over the working class. This is because socialism seemed to have a greater appeal, okay? Socialism seemed to have a greater appeal, and socialism was really was quite critical of religion. So critical of religion were the socialist ideas and the Bolsheviks, okay? Economic development was very liberal, with opportunities for women. That's a very good era. Okay, and by 1914, 45% of children were in primary school. This is compared to, if I just stop rotating the screen, this is compared to before 1855. So before 1855, okay, 85% of people were illiterate. Okay, and so in that time we've got a development where nearly half of all children were being educated in primary schools. Okay, and even by 1914 there was still respect for the church and there was still respect for the Tsar. Okay, this would change during the First World War, but the respect for the church and Tsar was still very high and prominent. Okay, there was no real huge problems during this time other than the 1905 revolution within society. Rural conditions weren't great, and that's where the most extremism came from. But in terms of the middle class, we see quite a positive social living conditions.